Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started today, I want to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by the online course, Creating a Meaningful Life. Now, this course is the culmination of 20 years of work and research by my personal mentor and university professor, Linda Levine, and myself. Now, in it, we teach not only the skills and strategies that we've used and taught and which are being used by life coaches all over the world to create a life of fulfillment and balance, but we also go into how you can design your lifestyle, how you can improve in every aspect, all 8 of the aspects that make a complete and rich life. And really, we share a lot of our wisdom. So if you've been inspired by the show, by some of the guests on here who seem to have these incredibly rich, fulfilling lives, I do encourage you to check it out. And of course, it is backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee. So to take advantage of a special coupon for listeners of this podcast, visit jle.vi/meaning. All right, here we go with the show. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's show. Before we get started, I want to read you guys a fantastic review from EUJMK of the UK, who says, "Inspiring and life-changing. I've been listening since the beginning, and I have to say it's the best podcast I subscribe to. The variety of guests and topics, the likability of Jonathan, and the general pursuit of becoming superhuman is awesome. The biggest compliment I can give it is that it has and continues to enhance my life." He goes on to say that he's signed up for the Become a Super Learner course, which has dramatically increased his reading speed and memory retention, and that he's taking on a new goal from every single episode he listens to, he or she. Thank you so much for your review. It really brightens my day, makes it all worthwhile. If you want to hear your review read out on the air, just leave one and I will read it out to you guys. On to today's episode. We're going to be exploring something a little bit different today. You see, in the past, we've talked about meditation and yoga, and in a sense, this episode will be a sort of continuation of that. However, today, we're going to explore it from another angle, which is Kabbalah. Now, for those of you who've never heard of it, Kabbalah is a lesser-known teaching of Judaism, actually, and it's characterized by a lot of mysticism and mystery. It's really kind of misunderstood, but recently it's become hugely popular among dozens of celebrities, from Madonna to David Beckham and Ashton Kutcher, Natalie Portman. So personally, I've always been really kind of intrigued and curious about it. I've never really understood what it was about, but given my interest in and enthusiasm for meditation, I kind of decided to explore that curiosity in a conversation with one of the experts on Kabbalah, and I just happened to record it for all of you. So in that sense, I'm really inviting you all to join me on my own kind of learning and exploration journey on a topic that I kind of really didn't know anything about. So I really hope you enjoy it. I hope it teaches you something, and maybe also it'll be something for you, something you want to explore, and something that can provide value in your life. So my goal in this episode was really to gain a deeper understanding, and there was no one better to do that with than today's guest, who's a world-renowned expert on Kabbalah, originally from South Africa. He's also a prolific author and translator. He's published hundreds of articles and some 20 books, the most widely known of which is the Zohar. And he's also the author of the Kabbalah of Character and a highly successful coach and teacher of the subject. So I hope we take away some practical teachings here, some inspiration, and some ideas that you can apply in your daily life. One way or another, I think you'll definitely enjoy the episode and the wisdom that my guest shares. So without further ado, let me present to you Rabbi Moshe Miller. Rabbi Miller, welcome to the show today, and also Chag Sameach, happy holiday. I know it's a Jewish holiday today, so thank you for making the time.
You're very welcome. It's the day of Lag BaOmer, which celebrates or commemorates the passing of the founder of Kabbalah.
Ah.
Shimon Bar Yochai.
Interesting. I didn't actually know that. I'm fairly secular myself, so I assume I will be learning a lot today about the religion I grew up with.
All right.
Rabbi Miller, tell us a bit about yourself and your life journey. What led you to Kabbalah?
Well, I was a student in college and university in South Africa, where I'm from originally, and I became very interested in philosophy, all the branches of philosophy that are taught in universities, and I started making quite a deep study of it. In fact, it was my major. And after a couple of years, I kind of got disappointed by not being able to find what it was that I was really after when I began the whole process of looking into philosophy. There's a lot of semantics, a lot of ideas, but not getting really down to the root of what a human being is all about, what the world is all about, why it's all here. In other words, it wasn't getting to what I suppose you would call the universal truths. And it so happened that there was someone came to give a lecture on Kabbalah at the university, and it was pretty fascinating. I was really interested, spoke to him afterwards. And that really began my journey as someone who delved into it. I spent many years afterwards in institutes of study, yeshiva, studying all the dimensions of Jewish thought and practice. And that's what brought me to this today. Here I am.
That's fascinating, Rabbi Miller. I think probably the biggest question in our audience's minds right now is this. What exactly is Kabbalah? I mean, I have to admit that even I, as someone who grew up Jewish, I don't really understand it at all. So fill us in on what exactly it is.
Okay. There's many ways, obviously, to talk about it, but just to put it in the proper perspective first. There are 4 different approaches to understanding the Bible and associated books. So one of those approaches is just to understand it basically on a literal level and to take out of it the practical applications in terms of what are called the commandments or the mitzvot in Hebrew and follow those. There's a sort of a deeper level of understanding which talks about the idea of things beyond the outer structure, the outer picture, but it's not really ever explained. It's only sort of hinted to. That is called remez. The first is called pshat, the simple, straightforward explanation. Then comes remez, where things are hinted to, but they're not really explained. And then there's the level of explanation, which is called the homiletical level of explanation, homily or sermonizing, which probably if you ever went to synagogue or temple, you know, the sermons that the rabbi gives on Sabbath, whenever, that's the sort of sermonizing aspect of things. And then there's the secret teachings of the Torah called Sod. Secret teachings of the Torah. So it's all really focusing on the same material, but from different points of view. You could see this in other disciplines as well. For example, we could talk about human emotions. There's the literary recording of human emotions, either in art or in theater or in poetry or, in writing. Then there's the psychological aspect where, a psychologist will go into the various kinds of human emotions and so on and so forth. And then there's the possible physiological aspects of emotion in how the emotion affects the other aspects of the body, of the heart, the lining of the stomach. People get ulcers from worrying too much and so on and so forth. So there are many ways of looking at the same thing and describing it differently. And that's really what Kabbalah is. It's a way of looking at things, the same things that other aspects of Jewish lore look at, but with the understanding that there's a sort of a secret dimension. I can explain a little bit deeper as well.
Yeah, I would love that.
The word Kabbalah, although it means the received tradition, something that couldn't have been worked out like logically, it's a received tradition that we got from going all the way back to Moses, essentially, the wisdom that's received. But it also means, it comes from a word meaning like alignment or correspondence. Hakbalah is the word in Hebrew. What does Kabbalah seek to do? It seeks to align the lower worlds with the higher worlds, or lower levels of reality with higher planes of reality, synchronize human consciousness with divine consciousness, your unique strengths and talents with your purpose in life. So it's synchronicity, alignment that Kabbalah is all about. And that's what I personally find so fascinating about it, is it delves right into the depths of things in order to really connect them. It's a very fascinating study and something that is extremely uplifting and enlightening.
So as I understand it, it's really about seeking the nature of consciousness and the nature of the human experience and understanding the big questions, why we're here, what is reality, those kinds of things, correct?
Correct.
I guess my question is, how does one go about practicing Kabbalah, right? Because the teaching of the mainstream Judaism, as you said, it's kind of the same lessons taught in a different way. In mainstream Judaism, we study scripture and read about the stories and teachings of God and prophets. How does one practice Kabbalah? What does it entail?
So there's an intellectual dimension. There's two aspects really to Kabbalah. One's called Kabbalah Iyunit, which means the sort of the intellectual aspect, the understanding of the underpinnings, like how things came into being in a sort of a cosmological sense, how the various planes of reality developed from one another, or what the origin of time is, what the origin of consciousness is. It's really an evolutionary, or rather we would say a devolutionary, because it evolves from a higher state to a lower state. It devolves in a sense. And so there's that aspect of things where one is trying to understand sort of the psychic or cosmic history of existence, while at the same time figuring out its inner structure, how it all works together, how the higher planes work with the lower planes, and so on and so forth. That's one aspect of things. So there's a lot of study involved. On the other hand, there's also meditation, the meditative aspects of Kabbalah, which would usually that would be called Kabbalah Ma'asit, practical Kabbalah, the application of the principles to practical everyday questions. Now, certainly historically, in terms of practical Kabbalah, there were people, and there are today also people who had tremendous spiritual powers that could, so to speak, I don't want to use the word manipulate, but adjust areas of existence which were problematic for one reason or another. Of course, the only goal is for the betterment of human beings, of mankind, of the world itself. The goal is never to control and to harm. But for obvious reasons, that aspect of things, the focus on increasing one's abilities to change things, has to be restricted and can only be given to by a teacher to a student who is worthy. So there's both of those aspects. Nevertheless, even though someone is not yet on that level where he could or she could appreciate that and receive it, it's nevertheless possible to use the meditations and the focuses which the practical meditative side of Kabbalah gives us.
Interesting. So we talked about the betterment of a person. What are the kinds of outcomes and improvements that one can expect by practicing Kabbalah? Is it similar to other meditative practices in those benefits?
No. I'll tell you why not. I don't think it is. I mean, in terms of making one's life a better life, yes. But the whole direction is very different. I would say it, at least the way I understand it. When we're talking about Buddhism and to a certain extent, certain sects of Christianity and Hinduism, so the focus generally there is to become holy, you have to leave the world. You have to go to an ashram, you have to go to a cave somewhere in the Himalayas, you have to go to a monastery, you have to live a life of a celibate life, not get married, whether it's a nun or a priest. And in a sense, you have to leave the world, vows of silence, and so on and so forth. You leave the world in order to escape the negativity of this world. You sort of have to leave the world and become this, spiritual being. Kabbalah doesn't see it like that at all. In fact, quite the contrary. The exact opposite is the purpose, to bring heaven down to earth, not leave earth to go to heaven. To bring heaven down to earth, meaning to make this place that we're in now, this existence, this sometimes very dark existence, into a place of light, into a place of holiness. So the objective is very different. Maybe some of the methods are the same, or at least similar, but certainly the objective is a very different one.
Interesting. Okay. So tell us a bit about some of the kind of benefits. I mean, you mentioned conducting and having a better life, better experience. And you also mentioned that, these I don't know if you used the word powers, but these gifts can only be bestowed on someone who is ready and by a qualified teacher. What are the gifts that Kabbalah can offer us in our lives? What are the benefits that are there to be received?
So, when I spoke about the gifts that can only be bestowed by a teacher, these are really very powerful spiritual powers and insights that the average individual maybe will not be able to achieve unless he or she puts in the time or effort. But everybody can achieve the basic paradigm of what it means to live a good life in the world. In other words, basically, Kabbalah provides us with perspectives by which you can understand yourself and the world in which you live, and a framework in which you can live your life to the fullest. Now, the objective is not information per se, but rather transformation, the transformation of the person. It begins by understanding your own sort of Kabbalistic profile. Every individual has his own Kabbalistic profile, sometimes revealed by a person's name. And once one understands that, you sort of start to build what it is that your purpose must be in life. Now, when I say what your purpose must be, we're all here for a reason. There's no one alive in the world who doesn't have a place and a purpose in being here. There's actually a very beautiful Hasidic story which illustrates this very well. There was a disciple of the famous Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi. Liadi is in Russia somewhere, White Russia. So this disciple went to his rabbi, and as was customary, when you go into your rabbi to ask him, these huge spiritual questions about your life and what you should be doing and so on and so forth, and how do I improve myself? So he wrote everything down on a piece of paper, and he handed it to the rabbi, because sometimes in the presence of great people, you sort of get tongue-tied. So the custom is to write it down. You give the note to the rabbi and whatever, and he sits there and given the insight that he has into you and into life in general, he would be able to guide you. So this disciple goes to the rabbi and he gives him this piece of paper. The rabbi looks at the piece of paper very, very carefully, and he turns it over, anything on the other side, and he puts it down for a minute, and then he goes into a state of meditation for a while. He comes back and he looks at his disciple and he says, "Look, I see that you've thought very, very carefully about what it is that you need. However, I don't see any hint here that you've ever thought what it is that you are needed for." And at that point, they say the disciple fainted and he had to be carried out. But when he woke up from his faint, he was a transformed person. He became really a new person. He was dancing and singing, he was happy, because now he finally understood what he'd been missing. I have a purpose, and I'm here to discover what I'm needed for. And that's liberating. And that's really what we aim for in practical Kabbalistic studies. What am I needed for?
And that's achieved through meditation and through study of the texts of Kabbalah.
Yes.
Okay. I think I'm starting to get a better understanding here. You mentioned, some of the, at the higher level, really kind of gifted practitioners achieving, I think you used the term powers. And given the title of the show, Becoming Superhuman, I do feel obligated to ask, the most sophisticated and dedicated practitioners of Kabbalah, what are they getting from it? What are they able to achieve?
Well, that's on the simplest level. We're talking about achieving a sense of fulfillment, of well-being, of happiness. That's on a very simple level. On a more profound level, I think you could say that the practitioners of Kabbalah are focused on helping out other people, making the world a better place for everybody. The story is told, one of the stories about the founder, essentially the founder or the great-grandfather of Kabbalah, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who today is the anniversary of his passing. He lived in the 2nd century. So the story is told that he was running away. He was escaping. He tried to escape the Roman forces that had recently conquered Israel, and they destroyed the temple. And many of the rabbis were their targets, because they knew that this was the spiritual life of the people and the hope for the future of the people, and they were attempting to capture them, to put them to death, and so on and so forth. So he escaped with his son, and they hid away in a cave. And they spent 12 years hiding from the Romans in the cave. When the Roman emperor passed away and it was declared that this was sort of amnesty, they came out of the cave, and when they saw people just simply tending to their fields and going about life, wherever they looked, the place just burst into flames. A voice came out of heaven and said, "This is what you came out of the cave for, go back." And they had to go back for another year. And then when they came out of the cave the second time, Rabbi Shimon, that's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's today is his anniversary, the first thing when he came out of the cave was to ask, what needs rectifying, what needs fixing, what needs improving, what do you need my help for? And that was a whole different way of looking at things. And that's really what the holiest souls of Kabbalah really come to the world to do. They come to improve the world for everybody, not just for this, but everybody. The disciples, the families of the disciples, and on a larger scale, the entire nation, and in an even larger scale, the world, as far as it's possible to make things better for everybody.
Fascinating. Okay, I'm definitely starting to understand it. You know, I know, Rabbi Miller, that Kabbalah has recently been embraced by a lot of secular people and non-Jews, specifically a lot of celebrities, athletes. I mean, people who really, as you said, are contributing to this world, are bringing joy into people's lives, accomplishment, and are operating at a very high level. Why do you think it is that Kabbalah has appealed to these people? Why has it experienced somewhat of a renaissance in popular culture?
It's difficult to answer for everybody, but I would say that probably, certainly in the case of various movie stars and things like that, celebrities, I would say that a lot of their interrelationship with people is based on glamour, especially, I would say, movie stars and things like, glamour is the name of the game. And I'm sure that they feel that in that glamour, the outside glamour and beauty is to a certain extent lacking an inner dimension. I'm sure that that's what they feel, and that's why they're looking for something deeper than just the outer physical blessing that they were born beautiful or born handsome or whatever, or born with a beautiful voice or with musical talent. There's got to be something deeper than that. There's got to be more in the world than my beauty, which will fade in 10, 20, 30 years, or my musical abilities, which, tastes will change and, it's going to move on. So there's got to be more to it than that. And I think that that's why people, if they're looking sincerely, I would say that that's probably what's behind it. Have the inner beauty as well as the outer beauty, the inner talent as well as the outer talent. That's what I would guess is their motivation.
Sounds reasonable. Someone once told me, and I don't know if this is true, once told me that Kabbalah can and should only be practiced by someone older who already has children, because it's very powerful. It can kind of reorganize your mind and change your entire perspective. Is that true, or is that kind of an urban legend?
It's not an urban legend, but let's just clarify. There are sources that say that a person should not learn Kabbalah until the age of 40.
Oh, wow.
And be married and so on and so forth. However, the father of modern Kabbalah, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, who passed away in the 1500s, passed away at the age of 39. So had he stuck to that rule, I think we wouldn't have had modern Kabbalah as we have it. And so it's not really true. Now, it also depends very much on which branch of Kabbalah one studies. The most modern development of Kabbalah, there's actually a history of 3 phases, really. The third phase of Kabbalah does not have that danger, because it looks not to transcend the world as so much as to transform the world. So therefore, it doesn't have that danger of sort of floating away. There are stories of disciples, the 4 sages, as told in the Talmud, the 4 sages who went into the paradise. It's called the paradise, which literally means the orchard. But the understanding is that they went to an extremely high spiritual level. And 3 of them were damaged thereby, and only one was not damaged. One came in, he went in peace, and he came back in peace. One went crazy, one became an apostate, and one died. Only one of them came back. Why? Because all the other 3 were not properly, solidly with their feet on the ground. That's what happened to them. Because they didn't have their feet on the ground, they left their heads in the wrong place. So that could have happened in the first 2 eras of development of Kabbalah. In the 3rd era of development, that's not the focus, because again, the focus there is bringing heaven down to earth and not remaining in heaven or leaving earth for heaven, so to speak. So the danger is not really there. Therefore, you find very young people learning Kabbalah. In fact, I had a webinar last night, and one of the participants is in his 20s, late 20s. It's not something that one has to be worried about, an age limitation today.
Okay, so fascinating. That's really super interesting. It also reminds me of another question I wanted to ask you. I really love doing the show because I ask the questions that most people probably would never dare ask. So I'm going to do exactly that, which is, in recent years, a lot of people have been holding up psychedelic substances and tribal substances that have been used also for thousands of years. Things like psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca, all these other drugs as a means for spiritual discovery and enlightened consciousness. And I know a lot of traditional religions are looking at these substances and hold them with high regard because of their powers for exactly that, awakening people to their purpose, the whole idea of the spirit quest. So what are your thoughts on this type of spiritual exploration?
It's difficult to say. I wouldn't say that all experiences that one has under the influence of substances are only dreamlike, or to use an even worse expression, are garbage. I wouldn't say that. I'm sure that there are, with guidance, there are certain benefits. However, the question is whether the benefits outweigh the dangers. The dangers of addiction, the dangers of, taking chemical substances and becoming dependent on them. As you know, many people become sort of addicted to that kind of substance because it gives you such a spiritual high. Now, what if you could achieve that spiritual high without substance? That would be much more powerful, I believe. There was a famous Hasidic rabbi named Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, and he also spoke about addiction. He said, I'm addicted to God. That was his. It's certainly a healthier addiction than other addictions. But again, I don't really, certainly in Kabbalistic practices, there's no one that I know who's an authentic Kabbalist that uses any substance or suggests that one use substances. It is, I would say, an organic method of getting to it, which means using your own powers to get to that state of joy, to that state of transcendence, to that state of perhaps euphoria, insight, would probably be a much better way to go.
Have you had experiences through Kabbalah and Kabbalistic meditation that have been eye-opening, transcendent, kind of peeks into the nature of reality in the way that people talk about something like an acid trip?
I'm not so familiar with acid trips and things, but yeah, I have had experiences, and I'm sure that many other people have as well. There's a euphoric experience that one can go through, and it can happen quite often, in fact. And deeply meditative experiences where you just completely lose track of the sense of time and the sense of space around you, and where sort of doors start to open up in spiritual realms that give you understanding of a much deeper reality than what our senses would have us believe is the only reality.
Wow. I forgot to ask, I just realized, in all forms of meditation, as far as I know, there's something that you focus on, whether the breath or a mantra. What is the object of focus during Kabbalistic meditation?
There are so many different variations and varieties of Kabbalistic meditation that it would be difficult to say. There is a breath meditation from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic branch of Kabbalah. Meditation on the breath. It's very different from the yoga meditation. There's meditation on holy names. There's meditation on concepts, sort of a conceptual idea. There's meditation on colors. And then there's meditations on withdrawing from the senses, withdrawing within. In fact, the senses, which we usually know about, the five senses, taste and touch and hearing and seeing and so on, are not the only senses that Kabbalah talks about. There are 12 senses according to Kabbalah. The work called Sefer Yetzirah describes 12 senses. The sense of eating, the sense of movement, the sense of balance. These are the senses that are spoken. The sense of sex, actually, is another one. In other words, in the process of meditation, we withdraw from all of those 12 senses to focus within. And then the focusing within begins with emotional senses. Right? Awareness of certain emotions. Then going through a gamut of emotions, really 7 emotions, 6 primary ones, and then transcending the emotions, withdrawing from the emotions into an intellectual concept, and then withdrawing from the intellectual concept into the essential core, which the intellectual concept is merely a manifestation of. That's the up process of meditation. Then that has to be followed by the down. In other words, drawing that inspiration down back into intellect, then into emotions, and then into the senses, and then back into the world. And then you get up from your meditation. So there are many, many different kinds of meditation, many different approaches, different things for different people. And I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Is this for everyone, do you think? Or are there people listening in the audience who, maybe should finish listening to this episode and never consider it again? I mean, is there a group of people for whom this is appropriate and a group for whom this is inappropriate?
I wouldn't say inappropriate for anybody. The expression that I heard in America is whatever floats your boat. It depends on the individual. I would say that everybody could find something in it, but for some people, it's simply not going to be appealing. That's not where their soul comes from, so to speak. Certainly for people who were born into the tribe, it's certainly appropriate for them to look into it. But I do have many people that come to my classes who aren't Jewish and who nevertheless, feel that they get something out of it and have changed their lives accordingly. Kabbalah can be applied, the principles and the ideas can be applied to many situations. They can be applied to business. They can be applied to medicine. They can be applied, maybe even engineering perhaps, like... There's this Chinese idea, I think it's called Sheng Fu, if I'm not mistaken, where they design houses in such a way as to make spaces which are comfortable to be in spiritually, as opposed to places which are jarring spiritually. And, Kabbalah can be applied to those kind of situations as well. And there's many very practical applications of ideas without a person necessarily having to commit to everything there is. Of course, it's preferable for people who are born into the tribe to commit further to, observe the requirements of the Torah. But ideas can be adapted and adjusted for people who are not holding by that. Nevertheless, of course, there has to be a moral side to, an individual who's pursuing these studies, because if a person is pursuing it for immoral reasons, I think ultimately, A, he won't get anything out of it, and B, it could very possibly destroy a person's life. Wow. It's possible. I mean, I don't know of any cases where that happened, but, it's certainly a warning on the label. Watch out. Don't use for immoral purposes.
Wow. So I guess the next question would be, we like to give practical, applicable, actionable advice on the show. So I think the next question is, how could someone listening in the audience begin to take advantage of some of the teachings of Kabbalah in their own lives?
Well, there are a lot of places to start. Classes, authentic classes, are probably the best place to start. There are classes available. There's websites that people can go to. There's my own website, KabbalahDecoded.com. There's another one called KabbalahOnline.org. There's many other websites. One can get a coach in Kabbalistic concepts. If anyone wants to correspond with me via my website or some other way, I could suggest some people in the area that I could talk to, discuss with, and go to classes on, there's many classes that are available for free on the internet or live classes. And that's really the way to begin. Of course, you have to sort out the wheat from the chaff, which sometimes is a little bit difficult. If anyone wants to correspond with me on this issue, I can point them to some authentic sources rather than inauthentic sources. But some of the ones that I've given, KabbalahDecoded.com, KabbalahOnline.org, and a few others I could direct them to are authentic and they're good, and probably people will get a lot of benefit out of.
Fantastic. So that is a good segue into the next question, which is, if people do want to reach out to you to learn more, where should we send them?
To that website and just hit the button for contact, and it'll come directly to me, and we can contact that way.
Perfect. Rabbi Miller, last question I have for you today. If our audience takes away just one lesson from this episode and carries it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that lesson to be?
I would say that the most important thing is that every person is here for a purpose. There's something that you're needed for. Start working out what it is that you're needed for, and then pursue it. Pursue it with everything that you have, with all your strengths, your core strengths and your other strengths. It'll lead to a sense of fulfillment, well-being, happiness, and go for it.
Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. Rabbi Moshe Miller, thank you so much. And again, wishing you a very happy holiday. It's really been a pleasure chatting with you, and I do hope we keep in touch.
I hope so too, and the pleasure is all mine.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye now.
All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you really, really enjoyed it and learned a ton of applicable stuff that can help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If so, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or however you found this podcast. In addition to that, we are always looking for great guest posts on the blog or awesome guests right here on the podcast. So if you know somebody, or you are somebody, or you have thought of somebody who would be a great fit for the show or for our blog, please reach out to us either on Twitter or by email. Our email is info@becomingasuperhuman.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.